want to be able to telegraph, hey, I know that you've seen a lot throughout the industry. I have something that maybe you haven't quite seen before, or is going to help you tremendously as an operator. I'm going to make your life a lot easier. That may be through you'll be able to deal with 2 or 3 less distributors. We're able to create absolute consistency. The person on Monday is going to serve the exact same thing the person on Saturday serves. We're able to fix your costs. There's a lot of ways to go about that. But even with that, it's really hard to get meetings. Everybody's calendar out. So that perseverance comes to play in the sense that I've had to do everything from just show up where, hey, I've been trying to call somebody for 6 months. Yeah, you have to. And, sometimes they'll go, how dare you? And sometimes they'll go, wow, man, I remember your name from all those emails. Come in, you got here.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Podcast, filled with marketing and leadership tips on launching and growing your business with your host, Deanne Mora.
Today on the podcast, we'll be talking about the businesses of tequila and mixers. I have the pleasure of welcoming Ken Mackenzie, founder of Fresh Victor, a premium line of all-natural, cold-pressed, refrigerated mixers people are using for cocktails or mocktails. With over 20 years of experience in the creation, import, and distribution of spirits and craft beverages, Ken is a successful serial entrepreneur with a rich history in the industry. Before launching Fresh Victor, Ken co-founded Republic Tequila and Republic Spirit Blends, which have won several awards. Now, if you're curious about the businesses of mixers and drinks, this is the episode for you. Ken, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Diane. I really appreciate it.
That's a pleasure. And let's start with your founder story. I know you've been in the industry for some time. How did you get started?
I think like a lot of great stories, it started with a love story. And for me personally, I fell into this completely backwards. I had no designs around, hey, I'm going to be in the beverage space or even the tequila space. I was in Northern California in the Bay Area where I grew up. And I met a girl from Guadalajara, Mexico. And we were strictly, for the first 8 months of our friendship, just strictly friends. I always knew she was going back to Guadalajara. I knew that she was going to go back home after she finished school. And so I had no designs on becoming her boyfriend or anything else. It was just a really, really strong friendship. And I think that was the turnkey for me. When she left, I realized what a huge void I had in my life. We were spending every moment together. I was getting up before, 5 a.m. to take walks with her in the morning. We were just inseparable. And it occurred to me before I had even kissed her the first time that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. Oh. And so when she left, the following weekend, I called her and I said, do you want to spend the rest of your life together? Do you want to get married? And she said, I really do.
Oh, you proposed over the phone like that?
There was a more formal proposal later with a ring and everything, but
okay, all right, just checking.
It was that ingrained that I just knew, and I wanted to make sure that I was onto the right track here. And so I bought a plane ticket and went down a couple weekends later, and I stayed. And I was really looking for investment opportunities. And as I was growing up, my father taught econ. And one of the things that he had always, instilled in me was when you're looking at any business opportunity, isn't somebody already doing it? And aren't they most likely doing it better than you can? You need to have prodigious points of difference or something to offer where you're actually adding value. And so it was, to be honest, it was kind of frustrating because I was looking around to my left and to my right. Guadalajara is the second largest city in Mexico, so there's a lot going on down there. And whether it was artwork or jewelry or tech or, textiles or whatever I was looking at, it was already being done fairly well. And so I didn't see the immediate opportunity in front of me. I'm really lucky that my wife's family had some strong ties in the Epicurean tequila industry. And one of the real opportunities for me was understanding how different Mexico and the United States are. Mexico is a cash-based society of what do you want to do today? They don't want to look at 7-year pro formas and long-term credit, terms. They want to know, what's the business at hand. And secondly, and really important, which I feel has been to a certain degree lost here in the States, or at least where I am in California and Silicon Valley, it's very relationship driven. There's pride attached to doing business in Mexico. And so it wasn't just about the money. It was, do I actually want to do business with you? Are we going to break bread? Are we going to have dinners together? Are our families going to know each other? Do I trust you? And that took a while. And then on the other side in the US, it was quite different. It was, can we see the 7-year pro formas, and can we see what the intention is behind building something on a vertical? And so I really set out to understand the disconnect. And funny enough, it was one of Mexico producing beautiful product that's akin to, I compare it to cognac oftentimes because it's so complex. I mean, agave as an ingredient, Blue Weber variety, is in the ground for anywhere from 8 to 12 years. And so you can imagine how complex that one ingredient is. Whereas a lot of Americans look at wine or anything else, which is an annual harvest of the grape.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something, Ken, that a lot of Americans don't, if they haven't experienced Mexico, that might not be as familiar, because in Mexico, I've had the good fortune of traveling there a fair bit in the past. There's sipping tequilas. It's not just, we think of tequila here and, you kind of sometimes think of, college and, the salt and the lemon and doing shots and or margaritas, but it's the tequila itself is appreciated, like you say, like a cognac, like a fine liquor.
And I am first in line as far as being guilty of that. Being raised here in the Bay Area, it was shots and margaritas, and it was mixto tequila. It was white or gold tequila. And so I was classically conditioned to that tequila nightmare of, oh, I can't really smell that. I
Mexican
had a
truth
bad
serum, right?
yeah. Yeah. Wow, what an education. You know what? They looked at me like, how boorish. Who raised you? Where are you coming from? Like, and if, thinking about this in perspective, I'm going back to the mid 90s. And so there weren't a whole lot of prevalent 100% agave, out front brands. And what I learned fairly quickly was, while Americans have been conditioned to shots and margaritas, in Mexico, it's everything in between. They were using it very much as a sipping vehicle or like vodka for mixing. And that was a real opportunity, because what was occurring was they were making really good tequila, then exporting it to the United States and realizing, hey, if we're making a liter of really good tequila for $1.60, why is it $65 on the shelf up in the state? Who's making all this money? What's happening? And that became a really good vehicle to consulting for, a number of years, probably 3 or 4 years. And my wife, now my wife, had turned to me and said, why are you showing everybody how to do this? The exportation, the importation, the selling to a wholesaler or distributor, retailer, marketing the tequila. We can be doing this. And so we started doing it. And it became a really, a passion of brand building and understanding that vertical for all the way from the agave fields to distribution and retail in the States.
Fascinating. And so over the years, how, we talked about the sort of college perception of tequila, but here in the United States, how has the tequila business evolved since you began?
A lot. In some ways, looking back, it felt like it took a tremendous amount of time. It felt like years and years that, the messaging had to get out there. Because quite frankly, when I started in the mid 90s, a lot of my discussions were predicated on bringing people back from that college nightmare. Hey, I know you can't smell it, but this is a completely different thing. Believe me, this is going to change your mind. As it started to gain more momentum and there was more education in the US around what 100% agave tequila actually is, we were seeing a lot more distributors and retailers adopting that messaging and letting Americans know generally that this is should be viewed as an Epicurean spirit, something that takes a great deal of time and care. I often, when I went into these distributor meetings to do tequila education, would say, if my wife and I plant agave in the fields, whether it's highlands or lowlands and Arandas or in the town of Tequila itself in the lowlands, our kid is probably, if my wife's pregnant, our kid is probably going to be in fourth or fifth grade when we harvest. That's just the ingredient,
Crazy concept when you think about it. Who
right?
think of most businesses, right? Who has that amount of patience for their raw materials?
Yeah. You're really invested in the futures market. You're saying, hey, and if anything goes wrong,
Yeah.
if there's a virus that sweeps over the crops, or the crops are burned, or the agave isn't nurtured enough or cared for correctly, you're just kind of out of luck because that investment evaporates. And prices on the commodity of agave can fluctuate prodigiously. And so you're in a kind of a tenuous position as far as you're really betting on you're going to get all the way through this race and you're going to be able to get the product out into the United States. And then you have the competitive aspect of how many other tequilas are you vying with for the broad market attention of America.
Very true. Very true. And so you're kind of you're spending a lot of time, you're invested in the tequila business. It sounds like through that process you launched a couple of brands. Is that, tell me about how that came about.
We launched a couple of brands. We first did it at home in the Bay Area, and that was comfortable because we were kind of going between Guadalajara and the Bay Area quite a bit, and launched in California, and then spread out to Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, kind of the greater Western states. Eventually hitting Texas and Florida, kind of the key markets. A lot of learnings, especially when I was young. I think that there's no way to explain to an entrepreneur how this is actually going to go in, let's say, a classroom setting, or even just an open discussion. You actually have to go through it. And I say that because a lot of my beliefs were predicated in, if I do make a really amazing product and do a good job, work hard, we should be able to create a market share for ourselves. What I didn't understand as a younger person is there's a lot of politics around all that. It's not as easy as just work hard and it all works out for you.
If only, right?
If only. It would have been great. But what I learned very quickly is you have a consolidated distribution system in the United States, and there are real players that demand attention from them. And so if you do make waves or you do make impact, and I was really fortunate in the sense that with our first brand, we made a real impact. And I felt like, oh man, I really have this down. I know what I'm doing. No, I did not. I
What was different? What changed with the second one?
What changed with the second one is I had a better understanding of the kinds of accounts that you need to capture and the kinds of programs and incentives you need to have in place in order to make sure that the business is protected from a customer standpoint. It's really easy, from a huge, when you have distributors that are making billions of dollars a year in annual revenue, you have to look at it from the perspective of, okay, if you're the small guy, they're already making a ton of money with their established players. So why do they want to rock the boat? It's just changing money from one hand to another. And with the ones that are really integrated into the buying systems and selling systems, you're gonna make waves if you start to eat away at their market share. And this isn't even on a, huge basis. Granted, we had a good amount of accounts, but once you start hitting that radar of you're on menus and you're in liquor stores and people are asking for it, the only place that you're going to be able to take that market share from is existing players. And so that was a real lesson for me.
So how were you doing distribution at the time if you weren't working through the big guys?
So getting to the big guys is the interesting part. The big guys aren't going to take on brands that have no accounts or no, revenue. There's no reason to. So it becomes a exercise of how do we let the industry know, A, we're here, and the consumer know that, hey, you should be buying this because it's either an exceptional brand or there's points of difference. And for me, having those lessons early on in life that, hey, you need to be different or you need to set yourself apart from all the other existing players was an important lesson. And so I was able to go out with the second brand saying, hey, we're certified organic. We're single estate bottled. We're 100% agave. We're, all these bells and whistles to be able to say, we have a really good offering here for both the industry and the consumer. And we do have something that people want. And so the distributor expects you to go out and create that business. You need to be self-distributed and getting it to a number of restaurants and bars and casinos and wherever you're going to distribute it to. So when you do finally get that distributor meeting, you're finally called up to the big leagues. You can say, hey, I'm handing you 250 or 300 accounts.
Mm.
I already
So you
have
have to do
established.
the legwork first, it sounds like. I think I'm hearing you say you have to create, first of all, an amazing brand, right? Like Seth Godin
Yeah.
says, purple cow, right? The product is your best marketing.
Yeah.
I guess grassroots efforts, get people to try it, go to your local establishment, get them to serve it and et cetera, until you start to build up a bit of a following. And then now you have an asset essentially that you can go to the big guys with and negotiate.
1,000%. And even then, it's not easy. I mean, they're looking at it like, okay, you've got, 300 accounts. Great. We'll take that on. But they still, and to, I've got to give them credit where credit's due too. It's a model where it's set up in a way that they're the logistics arm. They're able to get it to everywhere you want to be. But they're very transparent with you as far as you still have to continue and always do all the heavy lifting.
You still create the demand, it sounds like.
Yeah, you have to, because you're never going to, when I was coming up with the first couple of brands, the prevalent brands would have been like Grey Goose and Patron, and and they were emerging brands. They were, getting to be huge. They're not going to take their focus off those in order to cultivate a small regional brand.
Mm.
And so I think the bet there a lot of times, more often than not, is, hey, this probably won't make it. Let's just see where it goes. And
We'll take a flyer on you. Let's just,
yeah,
what seems like this massive business that you've built up in your mind, you're now a speck.
no harm, no foul. Like we're able to see this through because we've got our quarterly quotas on the important stuff. And if this is making some passive income for us, that's great. What I discovered, Diane, over time is as I was flying around the country and doing kind of these distributor seminars for tequila and national account seminars, just to educate about 100% agave tequila, what became very apparent to me is how accounts and consumers wanted to use it. And it's very much, a lot of what they do in Mexico, and you're familiar with Mexico, they may be sipping tequila and to the right of it, they'll have sangrita, as an alternate sipper. That wasn't here. And so what they wanted to do was very much utilize the mixing of the tequila in order to create more market share through cocktails.
Mm.
And so what was really apparent to me is as I was doing these, discussions, I would create tequila cocktails and show them, hey, here's a 3 citrus margarita, here's a Paloma, but I'm squeezing the limes and, the grapefruits and, blending agave nectar with water and, cutting that and adding it as a simple syrup. And a lot of the people were coming to me and saying, that was amazing. What a delicious cocktail. It took you 4.5 minutes to build that drink. How do you do that in 20 seconds? Because no account is going to take 4.5 minutes to build, your recipe. That kind of blew my mind. That was like, well, we've already led you to the horse to water. So what do you want to do with it? And them saying, well, you need a better delivery mechanism. Like, how do we do this at scale? And so that became kind of a challenge to us. And my wife, always being a little bit smarter than I am, had said, one thing that you may really want to consider is creating a mixer. And just like we, as we grew up with that tequila nightmare, for us, mixers had a bad rap the whole time growing up in the 80s and 90s because they were neon green and cloudy and high fructose corn syrup. I don't need to name any of them by brand name, but you didn't get excited about, oh, let's go out and buy a mixer, at Safeway. It was like, hey, let's make something really cool at home, fresh. So she said, how do you capture that in a bottle? It's a great question. It's a hard question. And so with our organic tequila brand in Austin, Texas, to the side of it, we created something called Republic Spirit Blends. And that's kind of another important facet of my wife being smarter. Is she said, I hope you're not going to call this a margarita mix. Of course I was. That was the only thing that I had on my mind is, a fresh margarita mix. And she said, hey, if you're using fresh ingredients and sweeteners, why couldn't you mix that with vodka or rum or gin or sparkling wine for mimosas or, anything, wine for
Plain
sangria?
water for people who want mocktails.
You're absolutely right. Yes, 100%. And why would you paint yourself into a corner of, if I'm not buying tequila today, I'm not using this product? And she was right. And that was probably one of the best moves that we've made collectively in our, adult career, was saying, hey, this is open to the broad market. We're going to create something fresh that can be used with, anything. And that really was the catalyst to understanding how to make something take off from a broad market perspective, because tequila has always been and always will be a love of mine and very rewarding. But there's only going to be a certain segment that will drink tequila. You can't make everybody drink tequila. You have a ceiling there. With this stuff, what I found, Diane, and what's really rewarding to me as an entrepreneur is I noticed that over the decades, I had people that didn't drink alcohol for a myriad of different reasons. It could be they never did in the first place. They're pregnant. They found that drinking wasn't a good idea for them, and so they backed away from it for health reasons. There's all sorts of reasons people don't drink. And they were always relegated at, these industry functions as well as parties to a bottle of Coke or a bottle of water. And it felt like a real discrepancy as far as, hey, one side is not drinking, one side's drinking. When we introduced this stuff, they were all drinking the same things. They were drinking, our classic lime or our Mexican lime and agave with tequila or vodka or rum or with sparkling water. And we were sharing the exact same experience and celebrating together lockstep.
So now they're included in the party a little bit more. They don't feel like they're outsiders. And Ken, what I love about this story, and I think can even be applied to other industries, is you had a business that was actually doing quite well, but you saw an opportunity to fill a need that wasn't being filled, that was really kind of tangential to your current business. So it was looking at, how do we, we talk about that term share of wallet when we look at customers, right? So what's the share of their wallet? What's the share of their spend? So, as business owners, I think we can always look and say, what else is our customer that we're already working with buying, and how can we potentially fill that need? And it's turned out to be, it sounds like complementary. And I think you're talking about the Fresh Victor brand that you launched to have that brand alongside your tequila brand, because now you're essentially increasing share of wallet through these two businesses. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about focus, we're talking about risk mitigation, because I can discuss that on either side of this table. You if you have a series of people you're working with, many of them could say, hey, this mixer thing, you're diluting your effort with the tequila.
Mm.
You need to be brutally focused on what you're doing. You're a tequila guy. And I did get that. I absolutely got that. I had people to my right and to my left that were saying, hey, eye on the prize, my friend. Like, we're doing well and we're tracking with this great tequila. Why do you want to introduce something else to it? By calling it the exact same thing that the tequila was named, by having Republic Tequila and then Republic Spirit blends, we maintained that brand equity. And we also reached a lot more people because you could mix, the spirit blends with Tito's, or with, Clayton Christopher at the time in Austin had Deep Eddy, or, you name it. You can mix it with it. Or like you said, sparkling water, or even just water for agua fresca. And so there's a lot of ways to use it. And so for me, it was an attention grabber. It's a risk because you're putting yourself out there. And if it didn't work, I know why people would say it didn't work. They would have said, hey,
We're focused.
yeah, exactly. Now, the really kind of fun or kind of evolution for me as an entrepreneur was when we left Republic and came back home to California from Austin. My wife was absolutely convinced, 100% convinced, that I was going to do the fifth tequila brand. And she implored me, please don't do that. You've done that before. you know how to do that. But let's look at what you are really passionate about the last 2.5 years. And to her point, and again, this often comes with being right. She said, you've done the tequila thing for a couple decades here. It's been well done. But with the spirit blends, you really saw a market opportunity that wasn't currently being cultivated in the US. When Republic was acquired, one thing that often happens when you hand your company off to somebody else is it gets much bigger. And the spirit blends that we were doing fresh, the acquiring company made them shelf stable. So they were no longer making it the same way I made it. And so for my wife, for Paulina, the thing that she really wanted to communicate to me at the time was, you're at a crossroads right now, and you have a real opportunity to do what you want to be doing. So yes, you could do this tequila. I totally understand, you got that totally dialed in, but let's look at the real opportunity. A fresh mixer brand that you were already passionate about, doing the 2.0 version of that and really doing it the way you want to do it with complete focus, could have some real broad market appeal to both on-premise and off-premise. And so you have restaurants, bars, cruise ships, casinos, resorts, hotels, ballparks, concerts, everybody that wants premium mixed drinks, cocktails or mocktails, but doesn't have the bandwidth to really create those 4-minute drinks. You could look at that, and also can think about it from the perspective of, you get to go to the dance with everybody, because you get to work with all the spirit brands. You get to work with the non-alc. So that's another consideration. And that's exactly what we did. We went all in and really focused our efforts on Fresh Victor. Because the other side of that, especially during COVID, and having, these unique circumstances, business circumstances, where a lot of my friends and colleagues and everybody else either struggled or just failed and dropped out because you were kind of at an impasse for getting business done, especially for cold chain products. We hit the consumer. And so, really approaching Epicurean grocery, for me, having dinner parties and the such, I never sat for dinner because I was always behind the bar. I was doing this four
You're the
minute
guy
cocktail.
making the 4.5 minute drinks.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I didn't feel terribly bad about that because everybody came to me and they all wanted more drinks. So I got to circulate with everybody, but I never really sat and had dinner and just the whole way through was able to say, hey, I'm just going to relax. It created something for the consumer where if they were at home, they could make really, really good drinks for their guests, whether it was just a Saturday pool party, a dinner party, holiday celebrations with friends and family. It really brings people together and they, have something that they can share with others. And so that we're especially proud of that too.
No, that's wonderful. And so obviously you'd been making these recipes for a while because you were the guy behind the bar. Um, so you knew that you had something that consumers would like, but when you kind of were getting into the swing of things with Fresh Victor and you knew that you had a viable product, how did you get started with your marketing? Was it the same kind of grassroots efforts that you had done with tequila previously?
It was. I think, like anything, you have to get that initial attention. And that's not easy because there's an educational facet to this, whether it's tequila or mixers, especially fresh mixers, because that's really, the two things that kind of occurred over time, Diane, like with tequila, when I was peddling tequila in the 90s or early 2000s, it was like, hey, this is really good. You get 10 years past that and the market's a lot more saturated. The buyer would look at me like, I need another 100% agave tequila, like I need a hole in my head. Like, you want to talk to me about this? So with mixers, it's a much more white space as far as you have a lot of runway here, but they have the preconceived notion. As I say, hey, I want to talk to you about a mixer. They're like, oh, a mixer? They're going back to the 80s and 90s and
They're
the
thinking the
cloudy mix.
brightly colored, full of additives. Yeah.
So that creates a really unique brand positioning because you're able to starkly contrast it and say, no, no, this isn't your father's mixer. This is something unique that I want to show you that you can be actually proud of, that you can say, hey, we serve this. So that's rewarding because you're able to go around to these accounts and show them something that they haven't really seen a whole lot before.
Well,
And that creates the
right.
pull.
Because I mean, you're thinking of like, that, and again, this can apply to any business that, if you're, so there's one thing about going into a market where there's competitors because it tells you at least that there's a market,
Right.
but if you're able to find something, your unique selling proposition, what is it that sets you apart so that you can kind of break from the noise and people will think, oh, yes, this is different. And now you can get their attention. So if you come in as a Me Too brand, then you've got a lot of heavy lifting from a marketing perspective.
Blue ocean, red ocean. You're absolutely right. That it's a great, insightful point that when you don't have players to your left and to your right that validate the in-kind space, people often wonder, is this real? Like, if this is
I need
true,
this.
yeah, if this is true, where have you been? Like, I
Right,
needed this 5 years ago and you weren't here. So what's going on?
right.
But it also creates a dialogue. It also creates that, because a lot of operators, they're so innovative. They're so overwhelmed with so many people wanting to get appointments and show them what they have. And it's a lot of the same stuff. It's really rewarding where you're able to bring something in and you're like on the on-premise side, hey, I can give you consistency. I can insulate your pricing so you have a per ounce pour cost and you know what it is. And the thing I think that I'm really proud of as far as the points of difference, how I really tried to approach this, Diane, was from an on-premise kind of bartender mixologist perspective, as well as the home consumer. Where are the bottlenecks or roadblocks or difficulties in serving things that they want to serve? And so that comes down to ingredients. And if you look at our portfolio, we're up to 9 flavors now. We're using prickly pear. Well, you're probably not on any given Saturday saying, hey, I'm going to really crush prickly pear this weekend. Jalapeno. Jalapeno is a great one. People love spicy margaritas using rum with it, whatever. But jalapeno can differ a whole lot in spiciness and Coville and all those levels. And so it's really hard to get that consistent or right. We take that away. Pineapple and ginger, three citrus and mint leaf, cucumber. We're trying to use raw ingredients that maybe you would absolutely want to drink, but isn't just simple to knock out all
Right, right, right. You don't want to spend a while trying to figure out how to do it. And then, if you are a commercial establishment, you've got to train the mixologists on, how to prepare it. And it might differ from one to another because it sounds like there's a lot of steps in the process of actually making the mixer.
Yeah, that's right.
So interesting. So then what has it been like, or what's your guidance with respect to trying to open up, a new hospitality establishment versus opening? I understand that you're in physical retail locations as well. How do you manage that process, and what advice do you have to our listeners?
Great question. Advice wise, the first and foremost, absolute perseverance. Like this is you're just going to get punched over and over and over again. And you really have to have a proper mindset for that. You can't get overly discouraged or being an entrepreneur is almost manic. It's a lot about really high highs and really low lows. And the low lows can wrap themselves around you and absolutely bear hug you until you feel like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. You have to be able to work through that often. And when looking at these presentations, it's like going door to door and selling vacuums. I mean, people look at you like, are you serious? Like right now, I only have a finite amount of time and I have way too much to do. So you need to first and foremost have a really interesting business proposition for the operator. You do. You need to make it, those points of difference I was talking about at the top of the hour. Those are really important because you want to be able to telegraph, hey, I know that you've seen a lot throughout the industry. I have something that maybe you haven't quite seen before or is going to help you tremendously as an operator. I'm going to make your life a lot easier. That may be through you'll be able to deal with two or three less distributors. We're able to create absolute consistency. The person on Monday is going to serve the exact same thing the person on Saturday serves. We're able to fix your costs. There's a lot of ways to go about that. But even with that, it's really hard to get meetings. Everybody's calendar out. So that perseverance comes to play in the sense that I've had to do everything from just show up where, hey, I've been trying to call somebody for 6 months. Yeah, you have to. And, sometimes they'll go, how dare you? And sometimes they'll go, wow, man, I remember your name from all those emails come in, you got here. So it's partially you create your own luck. You have to just absolutely be in it to win it, be okay to be rejected over and over and over again, but know that your product is meaningful enough and has enough cachet to create that ultimate market, kind of mission statement where if you put enough into it, it'll eventually work.
I love that. So I think I'm hearing from you that regardless of whether it's a mixture or whether it's tequila, alcoholic brands, that when you're launching a new brand, it's blood, sweat, and tears, it's grassroots, it's knocking on doors, it's showing up with samples, it's doing speaking events, seminars, reaching out, networking. It is just good old-fashioned hard work to get to the point where people will listen to you, trust you, try you, and then it's rinse and repeat to the next opportunity, it sounds like.
Yeah. And it's, I often compare this. It's, we, crystallized intelligence is talked about often. I think emotional intelligence isn't talked about enough. And, from where I sit, when I was a younger person, I was in a seminar where they were talking about a gentleman that had come out of World War II and launched a spirits portfolio. And his first spirits portfolio failed completely and he went into bankruptcy. And how devastating that was, and how his marriage fell apart, and how all these things happened. And I remember one of my friends turning to me during the seminar and saying, hey, what do you want to do about lunch? Should we, where do you want to go? And I realized right then, like this person had just been torn apart, like their entire lives were turned upside down and they had lost everything. They went on to create a multi-million-dollar business. I mean, they persevered through that. So it was an uplifting story at the end, but you can't feel that, or a lot of people can't. I feel like I have a little bit of it, but a lot of people can't feel that at all until it actually happens to them. You can't explain that to somebody, how that feels or how the circumstances are. That a lot of people would have just absolutely quit and went and worked for somebody. If you can take the learnings from your failures, and there will be failures, there absolutely will be in all businesses. There's no way to avoid that. There's those low points. If you can take learnings from that, and the only other really big piece of advice I would give is surround yourself with really exceptional people.
That's a great.
I think a lot of people try to, I don't know if it's ego or whatever else, but they try to be the most important person in the room or the smartest person in the room or whatever else. I've always surrounded myself with people that are smarter than I am. Because man, do you just learn so quickly. And while, I'm not self-deprecating at all, like I can hold my own, it helps so much because they give you perspective and they also bolster you in those low moments where they're like, hey, you know what? This happens all the time. You just got to work through it. Next week is a different week.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you can't necessarily afford to hire those people right away, have somebody maybe part-time as a consultant, something like you were to the tequila brands, but definitely, be in a mastermind, surround yourself with good people. I totally agree. I think it's really, really important. And with respect to the perseverance, I think it was Mark Cuban who was quoted as saying, you only need to get it right once.
That's right. Yeah. It's how you can figure out how to navigate through all of it. And, sometimes we lose stuff, we lose money, we lose, ability to keep the brand going or anything else. But man, those learnings are so important because I still feel like a 28-year-old, but yet I have all this knowledge now and I know what not to do. And so if you can get to that other side, there's nothing more rewarding. Like the highs are just so awesome if you can just keep it up. And so when you are with good people and you have a great product, no matter what it is or what you're doing, you'll get there if you really want to.
Totally agree, Ken. So what's next for the Fresh Victor?
We're funny enough, it's one of those situations where now we're just scaling. And so I'm looking at the channels that, really offer the most benefit from a time perspective and kind of those on-premise channels. There's always a split between the channels, but those on-premise channels are really rewarding as far as we can put it into, the restaurants, the bars, the clubs, the cruise ships, the casinos, the concert venues, the sports stadiums, everywhere will you'll go to drink it somewhere. They use it right away. You get it into a program or on a menu and they're able to pour it the same week that they buy it. And so there's less of an educational facet to that. With off-premise, like at Total Wine and More or a Whole Foods, it's really rewarding in the sense that consumers are pulling it off the shelf. And it creates a lot more brand equity, because people have it in their home refrigerators. And so you want to give proper attention to that and scale that as well. But you don't want to dilute your efforts where like, hey, we're doing that in 20 states, like, just all these supermarkets. It really needs to be focused on markets that you can support and you can do demos and tastings and get people to try it and share it. And then lastly, and this may be the most of interest to you, in the tequila business, I stayed so far away from direct to consumer. I wanted nothing to do with it. With alcohol laws and state by state, you do not want to be sending it to people's homes. And so you leave that to others. And so I had little to no experience with that. And with Fresh Victor being non-alcoholic, I don't have those regulations in place. And so we have our fulfillment center at our production facility here in Northern California. And we can send it anywhere in the United States within 48 hours. People can order on our website, and they can curate the flavors that they want and the number of bottles that they want and the sizes that they want. And we just send it to your doorstep, and you're able to have it at home. And that's really rewarding because we're able to kind of interact with the consumer directly.
Well, that's great. And one last question, Ken, does the consumer lead the retailer or does the retailer lead the consumer? In other words, are you out there when you're launching a brand, getting it out in front of the public and then there's public demand for it? Are you getting it into the retailer and then you're doing pop-ups in the retailer to do tastings, or is it kind of a combination?
It is a combination, but I'd say it's probably more of the latter, Diane. I'd say that I think that when you have a vertical like that, when there's a tier system, that you probably have to win over the industry a little bit more to inform the consumer. If the industry's not on board, if they don't believe in your product, the really rewarding thing, whether we're in grocery or liquor, like at a Total Wine, is that when you have a product that kind of stands out or is different, what we tried to do is kind of create a halo effect over their liquor department. So by going in and kind of explaining to the industry, hey, here's a product that's fresh, it's cold chain and refrigerated, it's non-GMO, it's kosher, it's low calorie because there's no preservatives, it's all natural. You can mix it with anything over there. Take your pick: tequila, vodka, rum, gin, champagne. It doesn't matter. It'll help you sell more of those products. They really like that. That's a great business proposition for them. And so what I find is a sweeping generalization is if I secret Santa and kind of walk into the store, like not wearing a Fresh Victor jacket, but just, in disguise, not disguise, but just not saying anything, I can hear these people saying, hey, have you seen this stuff yet? This stuff goes with everything. If your wife has vodka in the cart and you have bourbon in the cart, you guys can share this. You can do the 3 citrus and mint leaf. You can do the prickly pear and pomegranate. So it's really rewarding to see the industry get behind it, because that really helps to push it out the door, and then it creates that consumer pull.
I can't think of anything that would be more rewarding to an entrepreneur than to hear people talking about your product when they don't know that you're listening. So I think that's great. Ken, this has been a fascinating conversation. If people want to connect with you, where can they reach you?
So they can reach me at www.freshvictor.com, but more directly, I'm just ken@freshvictor.com.
Easy to remember. Thanks so much for joining me today, Ken. It's been a really, really interesting discussion.
Such a great pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed it.